right, welcome everyone to this week's edition and the first of the new year for Military Trailblazer office hours. I really appreciate you taking your time out of your Wednesday evening to spend it here with us in the spirit of community mentorship and, of course, learning. I'm your host, Dave Nava. I am ably assisted by my colleague, David Albright, and we're both solution engineers at Salesforce and Military Trailblazers. Each week, we invite a co-host or sometimes co-host to take part in the conversation so we can leverage their experience, their expertise, and their unique perspectives. The focus for tonight's session is on leadership, specifically how to translate naval career insights to civilian career success. So, whether you're in the military or not, if you're interested in enhancing your leadership toolkit by exploring lessons learned from a dynamic career in the Navy, this is the session for you. I'd like to welcome and briefly introduce our co-host for tonight's session, Brett Crozier. Brett is a pretty busy guy. He's the founder of Flightline Holdings, LLC, senior advisor to Support the Enlisted Project, and an advisor and strategic partner manager at Cap Connect Plus. A graduate of the Naval Academy, Naval War College, and Naval Nuclear Power School, Brett served in the U.S. Navy for 3 decades, retiring in 2022 as a captain. In 2023, he wrote a memoir of his leadership experiences, Surf When You Can, Lessons in Life, Loyalty, and Leadership from a Maverick Navy Captain. Brett, it's an absolute honor to have you co-hosting office hours with me. Welcome.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, happy to be here and happy New Year's to everyone out there. Great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you. So I'm going to go ahead and take a few moments to cover some administrative items, and I'll turn it back over to Brett, and I'll be sharing some slides with you from him as we go through those, and then we'll take some questions. So if you're joining for the first time, welcome. I always like to briefly explain the purpose of these office hours. And these sessions are essentially an informal get-together to gather with both military trailblazers and allies. Absolutely everyone is welcome, to explore primarily non-technical Salesforce career and branding related topics in order to help you achieve your professional development and career related goals. So for this next hour, this is your opportunity for collaborative mentorship. Everyone on the call is encouraged to step up and help answer and ask questions from your perspective, which of course will provide additional diversity of experience to the answers given. Please keep an eye on the chat window during tonight's session. I and others on the call will share a lot of great information, including learning, networking, and employment opportunities. And if you want to post your LinkedIn profile in there, please feel free to do so. We are here to connect and to learn. If you'd like to ask a question at any point during today's session, please, this is your session. Feel free to do so. I just ask that you either post it in chat if you're nervous speaking up, or raise your hand and I will call on you, or call out from chat in the order received. Finally, tonight's session is being recorded, so if you want to share an attribution-free comment, let me know before speaking. We'll do a time hack, and I will make sure that my video editor brings that or moves that out of the final recording. And then, as I mentioned, following Brett's slides, we will open the floor for questions. So I'm going to go ahead and switch what I'm presenting here and transition to Brett's slides. There we go. Over to you, Brett.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks again, Dave. David, excited to be here today, and great way to kick off the new year. I usually start talking about leadership by showing a picture like this and then tell people that's me, and they'll laugh because that's clearly not San Diego. We don't get waves like that. But the last week we actually had some pretty decent service. So this could have been anywhere along the coast of Southern California. And I say that because certainly the title of my book was Surf When You Can, but there is some applicability. We'll talk about why I think surfing or whatever it is you do for a break of your normal day-to-day is important. I think it makes you a better person, certainly, and certainly a better leader. But yeah, you guys kind of covered the bio. I did 30 years in the Navy, enjoyed every moment of it. It was certainly a large part of my life. I was lucky enough to fly helicopters, switch over and fly fighters, learn how to drive ships towards the end, had command of a couple of ships, and then retired only about 2 years ago here in San Diego, and lucky enough to call San Diego now my home. Along the way, I had my wife, Mary, who I think is out there in the crowd. We've been married now 29 years, so she was along for all of that as well. I think in that time frame we did 20 moves in that 30 years. So as you know, it's a transition. So in some ways, when we talk about a military to civilian transition, anyone that's a veteran knows you've done plenty of transitions. Every time you go to a new command, every time you move, that in itself is a transition. And so you're probably more experienced and ready for a transition than you realize for those that are getting out for the first time. And certainly if you're already out doing well, I would attribute that to your success in those military transitions. But yeah, military family, long lineage. I had an older son who was in the Navy, a middle son who's in the Navy. So everything I talk about leadership comes from my experience, mostly in the Navy, but with the utmost respect for for my time in the service and the men and women I was lucky enough to serve with. Next slide. Yeah, so you guys are all mostly technical people talking about Salesforce and CRM. I'm lucky enough that, Mary started a company called CloudCare, a Salesforce consultancy a couple of years ago. And that was based on, her experience, trying to help out nonprofits and being familiar with the incredible transition and skills and Trailblazer community that's out there. And that has continued to grow. And the main purpose being able to hire military spouses, veterans, those that support the military, in a very flexible kind of part-time technical work that pays well and allows you to help out nonprofits and for-profit as well. And as you know, it's a growing ecosystem, and it's extremely important to what we do now in this very data-friendly world that we're all in. I told Dave and David earlier, I did actually make it to a Dreamforce. I went to one back in 22, shortly after I retired. It was a different convention that I was used to from my days in the military, where people are generally in suits or flight suits and talking about things like airplanes and ships. But I had a lot of fun, and I enjoyed, even as a new veteran at that point, feeling welcome into the community and understanding more about what Salesforce does. And happy that our dinner conversations now are generally either around surfing, maybe vacations, but a lot of Salesforce discussion, because certainly Mary, with her company, is very busy with that and doing all she can with her team there to make a positive difference. So clientcloudcare.com. I love this picture here, though, because that's a lot of, you talk about the military, you talk about the Navy. What do we do? One, you do have to remind some people that the Navy has airplanes, but for the most part, we know that if you've been in the Navy. And we have pretty cool toys, but it really comes down to people. And what this doesn't show, of course, are the 5,000 people on that aircraft carrier that it takes to get that single F-18 airborne. All you see in this picture is one person, but if you've done time in the military, and certainly on aircraft carriers, you know that it takes 5,000. It takes a huge team, and that doesn't even include the support outside that. So one of the things I always learned early on was that life is a team sport, and that was reminded to me every day in the military. And if I was lucky enough to either drive a ship like that or fly off a ship like that, I try to never forget that there was thousands of people making that possible, and it was that kind of teamwork. And I think that's true no matter what you do outside the military. In fact, when you transition, one of the things you're really trying to do is find that team again and find where you fit in some new team, and try to to get that sense of teamwork that you had in the military. For me, for those that had positive experiences, at least. But when you transition, it can be challenging. So Dave, go to the next slide for me. I think this slide captures better than anything what a transition looks like. For those in the military, it's a pretty, from when I was an ensign from day one, when I graduated from Naval Academy, we were given like a book, and it would predict your career path up to the 30-year point. And if you stayed on that path, as I kind of did, that's what it looked like. And as you got more and more time in the service, you had more and more responsibility. And at some point you hit that 30-year mark and you retire. It was very predictable. It was very exciting. We did exciting things, but your career was pretty predictable in that regard. However, since I've been out, and for many of you that have been out for a while, the civilian career side is a much different. There's a bunch of up and downs. It doesn't go linear. There's sometimes you have more responsibility than others. And I think that can be daunting. And I think when you look at it, what it tends to do for most people is it tends to be something that people want to gravitate to what they know. So I have a lot of friends that went right into the military kind of defense sector, because that looks very similar to the left side of that slide. It's a more predictable path with pay. You're doing something you're familiar with. But what I've embraced and what I've really had fun, and all of you in this audience as well, it's the idea that you have a lot more control and uncertainty, but with that, a lot more reward, because you have a lot more control over your destiny in that regard. And if you look at it that way, and you look at that being unknown, but also, with that comes huge opportunity, and you embrace that, I think then, and the end result is when if you get towards the right side of the time in the career path, you will have more responsibility, and more importantly, you'll find it much more rewarding. All right, next slide. And like I said earlier, I think life's about relationships. So when you get to that new job, what you're really trying to do is find out where you fit in. And you're not wearing a uniform anymore. You're not talking the same language. I even worked at a nonprofit that focused on veterans, and I made the comment one day that I was going to PT, meaning I was going to go work out. And I got a lot of questions from the staff, like, did you hurt yourself? Are you going to physical therapy? I'm like, no, it's physical fitness, physical training. And it was a good reminder for me that, only about 7% of our nation has served or is serving right now. It's a low number, and it's actually decreasing. So that means 7% are either active duty or veterans. That's a small number, which means that you're not likely to come across many people that are veterans or active duty in your career outside the military. It's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, I think it's an advantage, and we'll talk about that towards the end. But it means that part of what you have to think about is how you transition, how you fit in, and how you make that happen. And there's a chapter in my book I talk about never turn down espresso. And it comes from a story of when I was in Italy and I was working with a NATO staff, and I was trying to just get the work done. I was working really hard, and I was kind of brought aside by one of the Italians that I worked with. And he said, "Hey, Chopper," which is my call sign. He's like, "You need to take time to have espresso with us. We want to get to know you so we can trust you. And if we get to trust you, then we'll do great things." And his broken English, I think I understood what he meant was, life's a team sport, and you've got to. It's incumbent upon you in a transition to figure out how you fit in. Doesn't mean change who you are. It just means that what does the other group look like, and how can you best accommodate. So I started drinking a lot of espresso. I still drink a lot of espresso today. And you can probably tell by the end of this, maybe I'll be coming off my caffeine high, but I think it's important. And I think it's, finding how you fit in is important, which means that as you're transitioning, it means networking. It means talking to people. It means when you're in your new job or that new opportunity, then it means listening and finding ways you can fit in the best. Next slide. I think the other key thing that I learned throughout my career, and I tried to apply even the transition, was that you're never too old to learn, right? And part of the transition is learning something new. In the military, if you go from job to job, you're still wearing the same uniform, you're cutting your hair the same way, you're speaking the same language. You might have to learn some new skills. But in my military career, I had 10 of my 30 years were in a classroom. So this comics from nuke school. When I went back to nuke school, when I was a 20-year commander, I'd been in the Navy 20 years, and I'm learning something totally new. And in class with me were 28 other ensigns and very junior officers fresh out of school with technical degrees. So I had a lot of learning to do. I had to ramp up pretty quickly. And eventually, after some struggles, I figured it out. But that's part of what life's about. It's part of what a transition about, is learning something new. And I think that's really your key to success. And if you approach it that way, you go back to that previous slide where we had the up and downs in your career path, your success is your willingness to learn new things along the way. And for all of you that have done Trailblazer and you're in this ecosystem, you're learning new stuff all the time. I mean, you're on the cutting edge of technology and you're learning things, and there's things set up well within the Salesforce ecosystem that allow you to do that. And I think that's phenomenal, which is why I think a lot of veterans gravitate to and do well in the Salesforce ecosystem because it does devote a lot of time to that training. I think, so again, never stop learning. If you go to the next slide, and I promise there's not a lot of slides. How do you get to that growth? Many people will retire or they'll get out of the military and they'll gravitate to that comfort zone, which is that small blue circle, because it's what they know. They can go work for the defense industry, they can go to law enforcement, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I would argue that if you're willing to challenge yourself, if you're willing to step in that fear and the learning zone and challenge yourself to learn new things, you will get to that growth zone. And then you can see the size of the circle. And if you grow as a person, you're going to be I guarantee you're much more satisfied. Not just about financial wealth, it's about just personal well-being and satisfaction in what you do. But it means you've got to challenge yourself and be willing to step into the fear, the unknown, and the learning zone, and to get you to that growth zone. So again, I stole this slide from somebody, but I think it's appropriate. And again, I have many friends that just say, you know what, I'm going to go fly for the airlines. Well, that kind of keeps you in that blue zone, in the comfort zone. That's okay. We need airline pilots. However, what I've chosen to do at least is try to stretch myself, try to learn new things, as all of you in this audience have as well. And I think that leads to just better growth overall. Okay, next slide. All right, so we talked about espresso, we talked about learning, and then I'll just cover one more topic I think is very important. This is the famous quote by philosopher Ferris Bueller, as we call him, for those that remember the movie. I think just to the title of my book, so I'm going to probably talk about this a little bit, but I think it's important. I think, although life's about relationships, you need to find those times to have fun and enjoy life. And surfing is for me, has become an opportunity and something I pursued more as I got more senior in the military, and certainly more now that I'm out of the military than I did before. And I found a lot of satisfaction. Next slide. Now, I say surfing. What do I mean? Well, many of you there aren't even near any kind of surf break, right? And probably some of you are in the middle of the country where it's cold and you might have to go ski or sled or just shovel snow. surfing is something that I do. It's a physical activity. There's other things I do as well. But we know scientifically now that when you work out, that it's good for endorphins, it's good for serotonin, all the things that make you think clearer and allow you to make better decisions. And that makes you a better worker, and it makes you a much better leader because it gives you that time to think and think more clearly. And so the top of the slide is really where I was in the beginning of my career in the military. I mean, I was like, I'm just going to outwork everybody. I'm going to work harder. I'm going to stay later. I'm going to fly more. And there's some truth to that as you're learning an organization. And those starting a new company, you're going to probably be towards the top. But at the end, what really makes it maybe more productive and still makes it more productive today is I found a better balance. And hard work is important, right? You've got to be willing to work hard. So there's no way to sugarcoat that if you want to be successful. But you need to have time. You take time off, vacation. You better be eating healthy, sleeping more, and exercising. And I think when you find that right balance, your life's just going to be better. And as a result of that, you're going to be a better worker. When I talk about leadership, when I'm on the road, I talk at like conventions, at corporate level stuff. One thing you talk about is that we're inundated with information, right? Our phones are in our hand almost all the time. The average American spends 7 hours in front of a screen every day. That doesn't include like Netflix and binge watching stuff. So we have tons of information coming at us. And if you're a leader and you're trying to make big, important decisions, well, you better find time to think. And it's not in front of a computer screen, and it's not where someone can call you. But I think that for me, I use surfing as an example. It could be to go work out. It could be just going to read a book. It could be doing yoga. It could be going to church. It doesn't matter what it is. If you find that balance, you take the time to surf, you will find that time to think and make those big strategic decisions when it's important. And it was important to me in my career as I got more and more senior. And I find that even true now. And I'd argue for all of you out there, think about the days where you work out in the morning. Are you, more or less productive throughout the day? Well, maybe if it's January 1st and you haven't worked out in 11 months, and maybe it's a different story. But in general, if you're regular about working out or finding time to take a break from work, I guarantee you're just going to be more productive. And I think science has backed that up. So I like to say, surf when you can. And again, it's a plug for the book, but the book isn't about surfing. And I've been to places where people have read the book and ask, well, hey, you didn't really talk about how to surf. Well, it's not about how to surf. It's about the importance of surfing, or whatever it is you do to find balance. And it's just one chapter. But since I'm in San Diego, I feel it appropriate to title the book that way because it gives me an excuse to go surfing more often to justify it. All right, next slide. All right, so again, this is really quick brief so we can just open up the questions and have a dialogue, which I think is more important. Successful career, I think transition requires good relationships. That can be networking, mentorships, and eagerness to learn new things, as we all need to, because you can't do the same thing forever if you're in the military. And then a strong life-work balance. And then next slide. Because as a pilot, I'd like to keep it simple. And I've already used up all my pictures. Never turn on espresso, fight complacency, and then surf when you can. So those are my big three kind of leadership takeaways. Go buy an espresso machine, go buy a surfboard, and start networking. But next slide. One thing I do want to end on, because I think this is important. It's my saved round, as we say. It's the veteran advantage. So every year, Gallup does a bunch of polls across the nation on various things, from politics to finance to social stuff. And one thing they do is they ask the public at large, what is their confidence in various institutions? So that can be churches, it can be big business, small business, Congress, president, Supreme Court, all that stuff. And they just rate it. And historically, for the last 30 years, I've been looking at this. Can you guess what's always in the top one or two? Well, you go next slide. So the military always remains the top one or two is a trusted institution in the country. Now, on the bottom of the list, you can see Congress and stuff. That's fine. And historically, they're always going to be low. So it's not a dig on Congress or any of that. That's the nature of politics. But as you get towards the top, American institution, American public in general has a lot of trust in small businesses, like your mom and pop businesses down the street, because the people. They actually have a high confidence in the police and medical system, but they really have a high confidence in the military. So if you're a veteran, no matter what you do when you transition, that comes with you. You're part of that 7%, right? Which is a really small segment of society, and it's a decreasing number. And of the 7%, probably only about 3% are actually working. So the others are either retired or doing something else. So if you're a military veteran and you're transitioning, what I try to tell people when I speak about it is you come with a huge advantage. And how you use that is important. It doesn't mean you come in and start breaking things. It means you come in with a lot of respect. You're given the benefit of the doubt on a lot of stuff. And I think it's important to know that and use that to your advantage and take advantage of opportunities like Trailblazer and all these other things that exist to help, bring in veterans, leverage those skills and allow you to succeed. And I think it's, for anyone getting out of the military or has gotten out of the military, I think it's something that needs to be reminded to them so they have some, have that confidence, because it's a lot of unknowns. I mean, I was in the military for 30 years, and you think I would have figured out exactly what I was going to do when I retired, and I don't know that I probably still haven't really figured it out, but I've had fun on the journey so far, and I think it's important for those that are getting out, that certainly younger in their lives per se, you have that military background. That's the advantage, and that will help you out if you use that correctly. Okay, that's my slides. I'm not a big slide guy. I just wanted to make sure I had some cool pictures. As a pilot, I like to show pictures because it means I can. But I'd love to chat more with you, Dave, and take any questions you guys might have.
Yeah, I appreciate the slides, Brett. It makes it all very relatable and helps to emphasize your points. And if you joined us a little bit after the top of the hour, we're chatting with Navy Captain retired Brett Crozier about leadership. His book, Surf When You Can be found on Amazon. It's a great read. It was my companion this past weekend. A lot of great lessons learned in leadership there. And so feel free to raise your hand if you have questions, put them in chat. And until you do, I will go through the questions that I've put together for Brett. And so, this is our kind of level up themed month. And, when I was thinking about kind of the purpose for the session, a person's leadership style really is influenced by the environments in which they work and, of course, the nature of the challenges that they are called upon to address and overcome, right? So it makes sense then that if you work in dynamic environments with high risk and higher stakes, then that acts as a crucible to forge great leaders. And so we're fortunate to have the ability to chat with such a leader tonight and leverage that lifetime of lessons learned to navigate each of our respective career paths. So with that in mind, first question is, Brett, what are 2 or 3, and maybe from the book, maybe not, what are 2 or 3 key leadership principles from your Navy career that you find most applicable to the civilian professional landscape?
Yeah, I think one was the learning piece, and I'll go back to that again because I think that's important. Any job you get to, it's unlikely that you're going to have all the expertise required to know everything about that company, that organization, or whatever that group is. You might, but I think there's always something new to learn. So I try to approach every new tour in the military or every transition or new job that I've had since I've left the military with a mindset that I've got a lot to learn. And I've got to be willing and humble enough to do that. It's very easy as you get senior in the military to step into a room and people want to defer to you for all the answers. Well, that's not true in the military. As a captain of the ship, I can tell you I didn't have all the answers. I had, and I can tell you now on the outside of the military, that's also not true. Just because you're an executive or senior leader with a company, you don't have all the answers. Because arguably, if you did, you wouldn't need a staff or people to help you do it. You'd just be able to make all decisions. But that's important because you have to be humble enough then to admit what you don't know. And it's very important to establish a culture that, supports that kind of open environment, open communication. So that you can ask questions and people don't think it's a trap, that they're willing to ask questions or raise their hand if they see something that's wrong. And that's how you get that's how you maximize your team, as it were, when everyone feels comfortable doing that. So that kind of leads to my second one, which is communication. And doesn't mean you have to be a great orator, right? Doesn't mean you have to be a Winston Churchill. What it means is you have to be willing to communicate. And that's a two-way street. That means you have to be willing to listen. And also means you have to be clear about what your vision and goals are for the organization. And on the first one, on the listening piece, again, it goes back to you're not going to know everything. And you also got to be willing to listen if you want to learn about your culture, you want to find out where the problems are, and you want to be approachable. And if you as a leader aren't approachable, if people don't want to bring you their problems because all you do is yell at them, well, guess what? They're going to stop bringing you their problems. And then those problems just don't go away because you don't hear about them. You just don't hear about them. And they generally manifest in different ways down the road. So, there's no such thing as too small a problem to bring the boss. If you're a good boss, you're going to take it in stride and realize that maybe there's a learning opportunity because it's something you would like your team to know and decide on their own. But the worst thing you can do is you can bite somebody's head off because they bring you something for a decision and you think they should have known it, or they're asking a silly question. You do that once and you're going to set a tone where people are never going to bring you problems anymore. And then equally as a leader, you have to be clear about the mission and your vision of what you're trying to do. And, I tried to do all I could. I mean, a ship of 5,000, as an example, it's not always easy to get everybody together and stop all operations to talk to them. So we had other things like TV, we had radio, we had the speaker system on the ship, and then we would do what we call all hands calls and bring like 3 of the 5,000 together to talk to them. But I never ever passed up an opportunity to talk to them when I could, because I knew that you really can't over communicate, and my analogy is look at Nike. Nike's slogan, just do it. Like, they didn't come out with that for like 1 month and say, hey, that's a good slogan, let's move on. I mean, they've been reiterating that slogan since they came up with it. And you ask 99% of the world right now and you say, what's Nike's slogan? They're going to say, just do it. Well, that's your goal as a leader. Someone isn't going to hear your message the first time, the second time, the third time, the 10th time. You cannot over communicate as a leader. And if you think you've already said it enough, I guarantee someone's already, someone didn't hear it or didn't hear it clearly. So resist the temptation to think I've already told the crew this, right? I already told the crew what our schedule was. I already told the crew what we're going to do. I'm telling you, you can't over communicate. And so it's a two-way street, right? You got to find that balance. You got to be willing to listen. That's part of communication. And you have to be willing to communicate a lot and tell people what you're thinking and what your vision is. And if you do that right, the good leaders do that right. And they balance that in the right way, such that your team's going to be aligned with what you're trying to do. And those are the two key things, I think. So anyways, be willing to learn and be willing to communicate, which is the two-way street. Those are probably the two things I try to take with me as I kind of move on into both the nonprofit world that I work in now, as well as the corporate side.
That's helpful. And the first thing you said really resonated, right? To be humble, because as in the Navy, as in technology, right? If you're not willing to be humble, then you will in fact be humbled by the circumstances that are presented to you. So that's, when I was transitioning, that was, and still remains, kind of my approach to almost every situation is be humble.
Yeah. I mean, I used to say too, like, you go in a room on a ship or even on the underside, someone in that room is smarter than you. In fact, probably they're all smarter than you. If you go into that approach and you go, man, it's just a matter of pulling out the information that I need and making sure they communicate. How do we set the environment? But if you walk in the room thinking you know everything, well, then you've already started on a deficit there, and the reality is you don't need that team, which is never the case. So,
right, yeah, it's not going to get you very far. Next question I had for you was, in your 3 decades of service, could you share a leadership challenge that you encountered that ultimately shaped your leadership approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that will go back to that, what we just talked about. I think some of the key things for me in my career that shaped me personally and as a leader was, I started off as a helicopter pilot. And so I got to fly helicopters out of Hawaii, which is a great place to fly helicopters, by the way, for a couple of years. And then I had an opportunity a couple of years later to transition to go fly F-18s. And it's not a very common transition. There's only probably like 5 or 6 people a year that get to do that. And I remember I was somewhat hesitant. I had a good mentor that kind of stepped in and guided me. And I went that path, and I had to go back to flight school. Like kind of like we just said, I had to go back into this learning mode and be humble enough to learn along the way. Now, some of the things I'd already learned about leadership, about mentoring and how to motivate people, that remained true regardless of what type of helicopter you flew. And then down the road, when I then transitioned to aircraft carriers as a ship driver, as we say, again, I had to go back to nuclear power school and kind of do it all over. And I still look back at my career, like, when did I ever really know? When was I ever the expert at any one thing I did? I don't know. I don't know if I ever was. I was always doing new things. But it was each one of those transitions I learned a lot from. I was able to take some things from a previous community, a different way of doing things. I was able to listen and learn from a new community, a new job, career, so to speak. And I think along the way it was me blending those things from those 3 distinct parts of my career, from helicopters to fighters to nuclear power and ship driving, that I learned a lot. I learned how these different, what worked best from all those communities. So I feel like I really was a student for all 30 years, not just technically and tactically from a helicopter ship perspective, but also as a leadership perspective. And it was a good environment to learn along the way. So it's kind of the same answer, but I think those for me were pretty defining moments. They certainly changed my career path along the way. And it ended up, with the end, when I was captain of an aircraft carrier where, well, then I was get to fly. I could fly helicopters and fighters and drive the ship. So it was kind of a culmination of all three, but it wasn't to the very end of that long career that was true. But I think the one thing that resonated across all of that was, what is the leader's priority? Like, how do you distill that down? And that's not easy to do, right? I do think, for me at least, leadership's about taking care of people, and that's it. Sounds like a bumper sticker. You can make bumper stickers if you want, put your name on it. But I think leadership, that is all it's about. It's just about taking care of people. And early in my career, I had a Navy chief, which is like a mid-level manager, very experienced, salty guy. And this was in Hawaii. And I remember, he sat me aside when I was kind of first learning how to lead people and run the line division. And he's like, sir, leaders have 3 priorities. That's it. These and you'll be fine. And he said, your first priority is take care of your sailors. Your second priority is to take care of your sailors. And your third priority is to take care of your sailors. And if you get those right, you'll be okay. And that rang true no matter whether I was flying helicopters or fighters or driving ships, or even at the midst of the COVID pandemic when I was on the Roosevelt. And I try to never lose sight of that. And that was kind of my North Star. I think it allowed me to weather some things along the way when everything got, hazy and gray and there was no clarity. To me, I just fell back to those priorities. What did Chief teach me? He said, hey, you got 3 priorities. Don't forget them. And I try to never forget them.
Yeah, and I think we can all relate to never really feeling like the expert, right? So tons to learn in the Navy. You're always changing duty stations, every 2 or 3 years. Same in the Salesforce ecosystem. The platform and the related capabilities are so large that no one person can ever be the expert. And so it was gratifying for me to watch those folks come in around me that were from the military and be able to understand that, but also be able to use skills they learned in the military and relate that to the tech world and ultimately be successful, even though they were never truly the expert.
Yeah, absolutely.
I see we've got a hand from Iris. Iris, you have the floor.
Hi, Iris.
Hello, thank you so much. And thank you so much for being here, Brett. We had the pleasure of meeting your gorgeous wife, who shared her story and made us all cry and fall in love with everything she does. And it's so awesome to have you sharing your story and just what you're bringing to the table. It's all so exciting, and it makes me so passionate on what I'm doing. But when things are down for your sailors, like when things are a little bit low, like, for example, talking to this community, things are just a little bit low, like people are doing the hard work, they're looking after themselves, they're sleeping, and they're trying to break into that ecosystem, and it's just a little bit challenging at the moment. What do you do to motivate your sailors when things are, a little bit down and, you're trying to find ways to keep everyone's morale up?
No, that's a great question, Iris, because obviously it's not always sunny and nice swells and waves. I think Napoleon had the quote, right, that leaders are dealers of hope, meaning that if the culture and the morale of an organization is probably more important than anything else in terms of their success. That's from a technical standpoint or a military standpoint. Obviously, he was speaking about it from a military standpoint, but I think there's a lot of truth to that. There's a fine line, though, right? If you're just saying things to be positive and people are going to see right through that. You have to be genuine, and I think it comes down to communicating about what's important and what you're trying to achieve. So one of my side jobs now is I work with a startup company, a tech startup company in the Bay Area, and let me tell you, startup companies, for the most part, except for the unicorns, there's a lot of struggles, right? You're always worried about funding. You're always worried about, am I going to, what's my runway left? How much money do I have left to pay the staff? And if you weren't careful, right? If you were always going to belabor that point, what the problem is, people are going to want to work and be motivated. If they're thinking their job's about to end because you don't have investment money coming in, well, you're going to probably be shopping for another job. And that could be true if you have personal challenges as well. So I think the ones that do it well and do it right they're honest about the challenges, but they remain optimistic about the future. meaning that, hey, you're going to have rainy days, right? You're going to have cloudy days. Even in San Diego, we have cloudy and rainy days, although it's very rare. But you talk about what the future looks like and what you're hoping to achieve. And you make sure that not just from an organizational standpoint, but what are the personal challenges? What are the personal things for each person that might be different? You know, their challenges, you know, if you're worried about payroll, well, some people might be worried about feeding their kids and others might be worried about a vacation. So they're two different mindsets. So I think as a leader, you have to know your people. You have to communicate, kind of calls back to that. You have to remain optimistic at all times. And if you do that over time, I think it kind of just guides people through those tough times. They just want to know they can get through it. Does that help a little bit?
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Really appreciate those words and giving me inspiration.
You're not in Japan, are you, Iris? I like your background.
No, I'm in DC. Okay. It does look fantastic though, doesn't it?
It does look fantastic.
Thanks very much for the question, Iris. We're going to take a quick pause so we can grab a photo of the group to share on social media so we can always be branding. So if you'd like to participate in the photo, go ahead and unmute your video. And if you are in your PJs and you don't feel like it, no worries there. I've had those days. I'll give you a second to unmute here and grab a quick snap. And Dave, if you'll back me up in case my mouth is open, that would be awesome. And then we'll dive back into the questions. And I want to kind of piggyback on the theme that Iris brought up, which was resiliency. All right, so let's see here.
Who wants to place money? I take a dumb photo. It's my God-given gift every other week.
Give you a count of 3. All right, 3, 2, 1. All right, so we at least have 2 pictures if one of our mouths is open. And so I wanted to dive in, Brett, a little bit to the book and talk about resiliency and some of the challenges you've faced with the COVID-19 pandemic. And so if folks haven't read the book or aren't aware, obviously it brought significant challenges to the Navy, as well as the USS Theodore Roosevelt, which Captain Crozier was captain of. And so could you share some insights into how you navigated the crisis, how you maintained morale among your crew, kind of piggybacking on what Iris was talking about, and really how this experience impacted your view on managing crises in general?
Sure, yeah, and that's a lot I know, and it's been long enough that we all like to pretend COVID never happened, so I'm okay with that philosophy too. I think I threw away all my last mask a couple weeks ago, but yeah. So quick story. We had a COVID breakout in basically it was early 2020 at the height of the pandemic, when the rest of the world was trying to figure out exactly what was going on as well. We were seeing pretty high mortality rates, upwards of 4% across the world, and we were faced with a outbreak on board the Roosevelt. If you're ever spending time on a ship, you know that it's like the worst place ever to kind of quarantine or socially distance. It just, by design, you can't do it. And we had 5,000 people on a 1,000-foot ship, so that's kind of the challenge. And we had the outbreak. So with that and all the uncertainty and fear, to be fairly honest, across the world, I had a crew that we were seeing exponential growth of COVID. We didn't have the masks and the stuff that we didn't now find commonplace, or some of the other things. We couldn't even test, to be honest. We didn't have tests that existed. We had a medical team on board that could do a lot of stuff, but they just gotten there and we were getting set up and we were doing like 100 people at a time. The bottom line is we had an outbreak. It was growing exponentially, and the Navy, as like the Department of Defense, like the world, was trying to figure out how to best deal with it. I knew the impact. I knew the potential impact. I knew the fatality rate wouldn't be 4%, but it could be pretty high, and the right fatality rate for a team that you're in charge of is 0. It's one thing if you're in combat and you understand that's the nature of warfare. It's another when it's not. So I made a beeline for Guam with the ship. We pulled in, and then we were trying to get assistance, trying to get people off the ship to quarantine on the island of Guam, and we were just running into resistance. One thing I learned as a leader of a large organization is that one of the only ways you can do that is to delegate, and it means you delegate the small decisions as much as you can. You empower people to make the decisions, and some of the bigger decisions obviously rest with the senior person in charge. Those could be strategic goals for the company, where it's going, or in my case, what we're going to do as a ship. But obviously, as a captain of a ship, you're responsible for all of that, and so I delegated what I could. But what still rested was how are we going to get the help we needed and we were kind of running into roadblocks, not with any malice, but the Department of Defense at large was trying to figure out how to deal with it, and we were dealing with political climate and everything else. So long story short, I was pushing back on the status quo. I wasn't accepting what was being offered, and I was pushing pretty hard. In the end, it got some both internal and public attention. An email was leaked, and eventually I was fired. I say that it was more defined than that, because I was very clear about what was happening, and I felt pretty like the stats we had were pretty clear as where things were going. And in the end, we had like 1,200 of the sailors test positive, and we had one chief that did pass away, Chief Thacker, which is obviously tragic, and the wife and 2 kids. But it was one of those defining moments, meaning that I talked about what Chief Garcia taught me about my priorities, and I was faced in a situation where we had this outbreak on the ship, and I needed to make sure that nothing was left on the table, and we in the Navy and the military were doing all we could to prevent a larger catastrophe. And so when I sent this email, I did it very deliberately. I did it to a small group of folks in the military, but I knew it was going to ruffle feathers. I knew it was going to rock the boat, to use the military term. And I was okay with that, because I knew that my priorities at that point had come down to what I'd been taught many years ago. It's about taking care of your people. And I was not going to risk the lives of my sailors for the inefficiency that existed in the bigger government. And I wanted to raise alarms or fire red flares, as I was referred to. Now, life isn't black and white, and it wasn't black and white then either, but we had a pretty good idea what's going on. We had all the data to support it, and we knew where things were headed, and we had a clearer picture, I guarantee, than anyone else in the world at that point. And so even though it's one of those things that, you're about to just rock the boat, to use the Navy term, but if you're doing it for the right reasons, if you're making decisions as a leader for the right reasons, meaning that you're doing it for your team, or you're doing it for the well-being of the organization and the longevity of the organization, you're going to be okay even if people disagree with you. You're going to be okay no matter what the outcome, and you're going to be okay even if you get fired. And I say that because when I sent the email, when I fired this red flare, I knew, not with 100% certainty, but I had a pretty good idea how it was going to play out. But I also knew that I wouldn't do it any differently, and I stand by that to this day. As a leader, if you're in charge of your people, there's going to be times when you have to step up and live to that mantra. And that was my North Star. And when you do that, I think it helps. So in my case, I felt like everything that came after was a potential from the beginning. So when you talk about resiliency, and I'm often asked that question, I want to say I felt good about losing my job. I didn't. It was the best job in the world. I mean, you fly helicopter, you fly fire, all the stuff I talked about, it was a phenomenal job. But it wasn't, if I was going to be in charge of that great team, then it wasn't worth anything if I wasn't one to stand up when it mattered. And so, but then you fast forward to what transpires after, and the public scrutiny and the political scrutiny and all that. I felt pretty comfortable dealing with all that, but I will say, obviously, I leveraged my family and my close personal ties and my mentorship and the team that I had built around me for support when I needed it. And so I think if there's a lesson there for those that aren't faced with like a huge like international event, this type decision, I think the importance though is to build the network around you, have strong friends, have strong families, be willing to communicate. I didn't make my decision in a vacuum. I had other leaders around me when I made the decision to do what I thought I had to do, and that helped me at least move forward, knowing that I had their support and I was willing to leverage that. So, as leaders, really anybody, you're going to be faced with tough decisions. We all are at some point in our lives. And there's going to be no good outcome. You're trying to make the best decision you can with the information you have. If you make a decision for the right reason and you have a strong team around you, then you're already 90% of your way through solving whatever comes next. You're going to have the strength and the resiliency you need to get through that. But if you don't, and you're suddenly faced with a situation like that, and you haven't built a strong network, and you don't have close friends, and then you make a tough decision, well, I imagine it's a lot harder, because then who are you going to turn to? Who's going to be there to support you? So don't wait till those decisions happen. As a leader, think about those types of decisions that could come your way, and then I think make the best decision you can with it. And if you have the support around you before it, you're going to have it when you're done. And it kind of goes back to what I started with today: is life's about relationships. Spend the time now to build those relationships, because they will weather you through that and help you get through those tough times. as a leader, when you have those tough times, you're going to want that support more than ever. So don't wait to that moment to try to do that.
Yeah, those are great points. I appreciate that, Brett. And just, another reason to be networking and branding yourself in the community, to build up those folks, those colleagues, those supporters, if you do find yourself in a situation where you need support, because you can't create that in an emergency. You can't create it in a vacuum. You have to have that standing by waiting for you should you need it. So I wanted to transition a bit, pardon the pun, and talk about military transition and mentorship. And we've talked about this on the show numerous times, right? Crucial to really any career transition, whether it's military or not, is successfully translating your skills in the context of your new environment. And then hand in hand with that is helpful is to practice cultivating mentors. So as someone who's successfully translated military skills into a thriving civilian career, what steps did you take to identify and communicate the value of your military experience to employers who, right, may not necessarily understand what that value is just by looking at, your resume of military accomplishments?
Yeah, I think it's an important point, right? How do you translate your skills, all the success you had in the military on the outside? You're coming from that small subset of society. You've done well in the military, and you have a new skill and you're trying to figure it out in the new community. So, I look back, I remember the first resume that I ever wrote, I'd cut and paste things right from my fit reps, right, from my military kind of merit-based promotion system. And I thought it looked pretty good. I mean, it all made sense to me. And I actually sent it to, he was a department head of mine. So he was junior to me by about, 5 or 6 years, but he'd already transitioned out and he had been successful. Sully is his name. And I said, Sully, hey, do you mind just looking at this? And in my mind, I'm thinking, I was his former boss, and but we had a pretty good relationship, and he was pretty willing to provide feedback. And I remember thinking he was just going to write back like, man, it looks awesome. Like, you do these great things in the military, you're going to be awesome. And he wrote back and it was like, the whole thing was like red font, like every single line that he had typed on. And so, there's a couple lessons there. One is, ask questions, right? Be humble enough to be willing to ask people that have already transitioned. Find mentors. It's very easy in the military. This was a guy that was very junior to me, so to speak, from a career wise, but I knew he was sharp and I knew he'd provide good feedback, and I was willing to reach out to him. And I thought, I now look at my resumes, which I kind of built from that one that he helped me with, and I realized how valuable that feedback was. Like I could have gone to a professional resume writing class and it wouldn't have been any better than that. And I give Sully the credit for that because he's done great things. And so find the mentors, find people you can bounce, and be willing to share your resumes and be willing to share what you want to do. And that can be people that are senior to you, because naturally we always think of mentors as being somebody that's senior to you, but the reality is mentors can be anybody that you want to learn from. It can be a senior person, it can be a peer, it can be somebody junior, but they've already gone through the transition and they're in a certain kind of career path that you want to learn from. And don't be afraid to ask questions. And if you do it in the right way, you'll get tremendous feedback, as I did. And that's kind of talked a little about mentorship, but it was really that willingness to ask. And then along with that, I probably had about 1,000 cups of coffee or espresso with various people over the last couple of years. Even if I didn't think I wanted to go do what they were doing, I just want to learn more about it. And I found now that I'm in the nonprofit world, where it's all about networking and trying to, bring people together to help solve problems, which is really what business is about in any regard. Those networking skills are very important the more senior you get, because you are trying to network outside your own company oftentimes, as I find in both the startup world and the nonprofit world. So those same lessons apply, I think, to you both personally and then professionally once you're even more senior.
Yeah, it's I think it's something we all recognize, right? We need to have mentors, but oftentimes that's kind of where it ends, and we're not really sure how to find those mentors, how to cultivate those folks in your life that can ultimately be helpful to you in your transition. Any tips for how you personally kind of put together your cadre of mentors that helped you transition or throughout your career? Not necessarily from military to civilian, but even from being a junior to a senior leader.
Well, I think one of the best tools in the world is LinkedIn, and I say it because I certainly cold called people that were doing something that I was interested in, or I knew I could get feedback from, and I've tried to honor that deal. Whereas people reach out to me, and I'm always happy to take a phone call or discussion about it. I mean, part of it is, have a rough idea of maybe what you want to do and start there, but don't be afraid to follow your nose and follow where that might lead you. I mean, again, the biggest challenge of transitioning for me at least, is figuring out what do you want to do. I mean, you've done one thing essentially for 30, 20, 10, whatever it is. And now you're trying to figure out what the next couple decades look like. And that's not an easy decision. It's not one you should take lightly. I do see people that sometimes just, they go right to the government job, the GS job, right when they get out, because it's a known quantity, and they just kind of, they never get to that growth circle we talked about. So in the world of mentorship, how do you, when you think of that growth circle, and you think about where you want to be and where you want to grow, think about people that you're stretching to, people that, even if they're non-military, or veterans, reach out to them and say, hey, I'm interested to know more about how you're solving veteran homelessness. And, do you have time for a call? The deal is you have to be willing to do that as well when people reach out to you. But I've used LinkedIn as a tool. I've looked for senior leaders that have maybe had a similar military career path. I've looked for peers that maybe are just, went different paths early on in their lives. And I've looked for junior folks that might have been more established in the community, because sometimes they are the best resources. They've learned a lot on a technical level, and they can help guide you. And they might even, know, hey, I know where your strengths are already. Let me help you figure out where you can get a fit in this new kind of ecosystem, as it were. But yeah, a lot of coffee, a lot of questions, a lot of phone calls. And I think that, again, the payback is that when people reach out to you, as you get more senior and established, then you got to be willing to pay it back. That's kind of how it works. And I think it's usually been a pretty good success for me.
Yeah, and I want to foot stomp that, the paying it back. It was interesting. I had actually this week a sailor reach out to me who was on Carrier Strike Group 3 staff when I was the Flag EWO, electronic warfare officer, and he just gotten his degree, he'd gotten out, and he's trying to forge his network. So it's absolutely instrumental to pay it back, and it makes you a better professional as well, right? Helping those other folks, because the best way to learn is to teach. I know Megan mentioned in the chat Veterati and Hiring Our Heroes, also great resources for mentors.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot.
Next year, starting this year, I will be on Veterati, so I'm doing all my paperwork now.
Awesome.
Yeah, some great resources out there for those that are in the process. But and like I said, ask as you build your network as well, and you kind of the key is, again, finding what you want to do. That's the hardest decision you make when you get out, is what do you want to do? You don't want to I would argue it's not in your interest to just do what comes first or do what pays the most, even though it sounds alluring, but take the time. Go surfing, right? Because this is where surfing comes in. When I retired, I surfed 30 straight days, starting the day after my retirement ceremony, just because I wanted to take a break from what I've been doing for 30 years. And I think it also helps you think. So these kind of decisions, what you do, are pretty big strategic decisions for you personally as a professional. So spend the time, and don't be afraid to try new things, but also spend the time to know what you want to do and get to find yourself.
Yeah, great points. As we kind of pivot back to leadership styles, transitioning from a military chain of command to a corporate structure is a significant paradigm shift. What advice do you have for veterans that are looking to adapt their leadership style when moving into civilian roles?
Well, I learned not to get mad when people were late to meetings, because I found that I was the only one showing up on time to meetings, which took me a while to simmer down a little bit. I do think that one of the things you get good at in the military, whether you realize it or not, is the leadership development within the military is pretty phenomenal. I've seen various different levels of this in the corporate world, whether it's major Fortune 500 companies to small startups, but no one really does it as well. Doesn't mean they're all great leaders. It just means that the development process that exists in the military is pretty phenomenal. When you think about how that's done and how you're developed and mentored along the way, doesn't mean it's perfect, but I think what I've seen is it's pretty good. So when you get to what I've found on the corporate side is people have different understanding of what leadership means, and haven't really thought through, just because you're the CEO of a company doesn't mean you're a good leader, to be honest, in the civilian world. You might just be the smartest tech, you might have founded the company, whatever the case may be. And so I've learned a little bit of patience too, when I step into the nonprofit and the corporate side, to not expect that I'm going to, just because a person's a CEO of a company, that they're going to be the equivalent of a 4-star admiral that has all this leadership development. Again, not all four-star admirals are the same, but that's okay too. That means if they're a good CEO, they're willing to learn and they're humble about what their strengths and their weaknesses are. And there's an opportunity. So you already come into these environments with some pretty honed leadership skills, with a lot to learn. And don't be afraid to take charge, or means, when something needs to get done, volunteer to help out, because you are a better leader than you even probably realize. Even though it's a new environment and it's a new language, leadership loves a vacuum. And I'd argue on the civilian side, people don't step up as quickly as you're used to in the military. And there's an opportunity there. So as a veteran or somebody associated with the military in any regards, you know what it means to take charge. So take charge and be humble enough to learn along the way. And I found there's always ample opportunities to do that, no matter what corporation or nonprofit I've worked with since I've gotten out.
Yeah, that gets me and Dave into trouble quite a bit, as we're the only ones to volunteer. So
yeah, there's a downside to it. You're right.
No, but point, spot on, and being mindful of that cultural shift as you're exercising your leadership style, because it is different. So being on time is late, and we have contests where we kind of see some of us former military folks who can be the first to show up in a meeting.
Yeah.
We've got about 4 minutes left, so I wanted to before we close tonight's session, ask one more question. And we've talked a lot about some of the leadership principles that guided your military career, and how you leverage those to get through adversity and to be resilient. So kind of flipping the coin over, what overarching leadership lesson from your military career has proven to be a guiding force in shaping your post-military professional path?
I think we touched on it, but it's worth saying again. It's just the willingness to learn new things. I mean, learn like you're going to live forever. Whatever Gandhi's quote was is very applicable, no matter if you're getting out of the military when you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, or 50s. There's a lot of life left. So don't feel the need to fall back on what you've done, and be willing to learn. And I found, whether it's nonprofit stuff, trying to help solve financial crisis for military members or homelessness, or I'm now in a startup working on fixed equity market in the commercial paper realm of finance. Most of those things I had no idea about. But I'm willing to learn, and I always kind of approach it with that mindset of, hey, I know how to communicate, I know how to lead, I just need to learn all the stuff that goes with that. And that's something I did learn in the military through my career, and I think it's proven true. And so that's true for certainly anybody going to Salesforce. Unless you're in the military doing Salesforce, which most don't, you've got to learn. And Salesforce has an incredible opportunity to do that with the Trailblazer stuff. And I think that's most companies don't have something set up like that. So that's a huge advantage that Salesforce has, because it's an opportunity for your military to come in with your discipline, with your hard work, with your natural leadership capabilities, and a training program that allows you to learn, as fast as you want at your own pace, and create some incredible skills. And my hats off to Salesforce and the community that not only does that, supports that, but embraces that and creates these networks that you have kind of built-in mentorship. I mean, that's the key to success. I found that to be true as I've transitioned myself personally. And I know that's why Salesforce has been successful, because they've done that very, very well. It's my hats off to them.
Yeah, I think you mentioned General Colin Powell in your book at one point, and that was honestly the genesis behind the Salesforce military program. Is he was on our board of directors, and he pulled aside our CEO Mark Benioff and said, "Hey, we need to do something to enable not only our transitioning service members and veterans, but also our spouses." And so that has paid huge dividends. Yeah. But learn like you're going to live forever. I do love that. Before we close, we've got 1 minute, and Iris has a question just under the buzzer. Iris,
I'll be quick, I promise. I'm so sorry. I really wanted to ask very quickly. Sometimes people get out of the military and they've had so much years of leadership. They just want to step away from that a little bit. Do you have any advice for those who just want to be individual contributors without, looking like they necessarily don't have ambition, or they just want to get on with this, but don't want to manage people anymore? You know what I mean?
No, I certainly have seen that. And there's been days when I've thought the same thing. It's like, I don't want to take on responsibility any more than I have to. Some people, though, I think it can be exhausting, right? Depending on your personality, and sometimes leadership gets tiring. As you guys know, you're bearing a lot of weight and responsibility. And so I certainly understand when people don't want to do that. And I don't fault them for that. I try to always encourage them to say, I know you're capable of more. I know the team would benefit from, more involvement, but only when they're ready, right? You can't force someone to lead, but what I have seen are people eventually, they kind of, once they get comfortable, then they are willing to step up a little bit and take more responsibility. And oftentimes they become the best leaders that you have because they were slow and deliberate about this process.
Awesome. Thanks for the question, Iris. And we are on time. So before we do close, I did want to thank Brett for spending the past hour with us, talking to us about leadership and his leadership principles and how he's navigated the various challenges in the military. I appreciate that very much, Brett. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Happy New Year, and really excited to be part of this today.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thanks again, Mary, for joining as well. I see you in the audience. Great to see you. And thank you to all of you for spending the past hour with us. Hope to see you here in a couple of weeks for our next session. In the meantime, please stay safe.